Aloha and welcome to another episode of the Living Legend Lawyers series sponsored by the Hawaii State Bar Association. This episode is appropriately titled The Long Road to the Bench. And I may add that the road in this case, for both of the distinguished gentlemen to my left, who will be speaking to us this afternoon, was not only long, but it was also dusty and composed of red dirt because they're both from plantation families. Our guests today are, to my immediate left, the Honorable Alfred Laureta. He's bar number 295. He's a retired United States District Judge, and the Honorable Simeon Acoba, retired Associate Justice of the Hawaii Supreme Court, also retired, as indicated, bar number 791. Both judges have been, in many respects, the very first in their fields. My name is Howard Luke, and I'll be the host. Now, after a very distinguished career as a private attorney in private practice, as an appointed director of the state labor department, or actually it was a territorial labor department in those days, eventually leading to a judgeship at the circuit court level on the island of Oahu, followed by a circuit court judgeship at on Kauai. Judge Loretta, 10 years plus on the bench, was nominated and appointed as the first United States District Judge of Filipino ancestry in the history of the United States, and also the first United States District Judge for the District of the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. Justice Acoba has an equally distinguished career. He also grew up in a plantation family. He's one of the very few, perhaps maybe one of only two jurists who have sat in every court in the state of Hawaii. The Honolulu District Court, elevated to the Circuit Court of the First Circuit, followed by his appointment to sit as a appellate judge for the Intermediate Court of Appeals, and then appointed to the Hawaii State Supreme Court, where he finished his career as a jurist and of course, left a legacy of wonderful opinions that many people look to understand about not only the heritage of our judiciary's commitment to individual liberties and justice, but also to some of the finest writing, in my opinion, draftsmanship in the legal and appellate arena. Now, having said that, Justice Acoba was not the first Supreme Court Justice of Filipino ancestry. I think he was preceded by the very distinguished Honorable Benjamin Manor, but he did retire as such. He did retire just last year, I believe, or this year, upon reaching the age of 70. Not by choice, and certainly not by any diminution in his ability as a jurist. I think he was actually peaking, but by virtue of the fact that the retirement age is age 70 and he had no choice but to hang up his robe. Now, both men are truly legends of the law. I want to say, first of all, that Judge Loretta and Justice Acoba, I personally am very honored to be allowed to be the moderator today. I hope I do you justice. No pun intended. You know, what I'd first like to do, we have a limited amount of time. I'd like to go first to Judge Loretta. Full disclosure, not my first boss, but my first boss in the judicial arena. I was his first law clerk when he was appointed to the U.S. District Judge, judgeship by President Carter back in 1978, I believe it was. And we went out to Saipan together. I would say that my first job upon arrival at the U.S. District Court was to try to get some cars that were underwater, above water, because we had the heaviest rainfall ever, and the first 2 weeks was spent bailing out water from the residence which Judge Loretta inherited when he became a district judge. Judge Loretta, I'd like to ask you first, I know that you came from a plantation camp background. One of the most unusual things about you, I think, is not only that, but you were raised by a single parent, and in this case, by a father. Some people might expect a mother. Could you tell us a little bit about your background from, you know, small kid time?
Well, I'll try to tell you a story as short as it possibly can. The fact remains, my parents were divorced at a very early time of my growth, and while I was growing up with my parents. My mother decided to keep custody of me. However, she wanted to let my father have custody of myself, by telling me telling me a story about it's not a very good place for you to go and stay with your father in a plantation up in the town of Makawao on the island of Maui, because where you go and stay with your father, they have monkeys over there, and those monkeys are going to steal you and take you away. Well, she told me a damn good story, but the next day when my father came over and asked me if I'd like to still go and live with him, I told him about the story, and I said, I want to go to Makawao and see where the monkeys are. From that period of time, I lived with my father up until the time that I became an adult. By my being with my father, I was open and exposed to the kind of life that I eventually developed and grew into.
Now, Judge Loretta, I understand that you went to boarding school in Maui, is that correct?
Fordham,
No,
sorry.
boarding school.
Yes. From Makawao School, I went from first grade to eighth grade. And from eighth grade, I went to Lahaina Luna High School, which is a boarding school on the island of Maui. In fact, the boarding school, Lahaina Luna, is the only boarding school that is a public school. I was able to attend Lahaina Luna for 4 years. And of course, being at the Lahaina Luna boarding school, you had to, in a way, work for your board. And that was how my schooling, my expenses at Lahaina Luna were paid for.
You were raised in a plantation camp? Is that correct?
I was raised completely in a plantation camp. When I grew up in the island, on the camp of Libby on the island of Maui, I lived with other single men working for the plantation, because the camp there, half of the camp was divided into Japanese families, but the workers in the other half of the camp were all Filipinos, and they were all workers, employees of Libby Camp. May I say this? The fact that I grew up with these single men at this Libby Camp gave me the opportunity to learn from them, because they, in a sense, became my stepfathers in the entire camp. Every time they see me, anything that is wrong, it's always to this: Alfred, you be a good boy. And that's what they tried to teach me throughout my growth in that camp. I hope I became a good boy, but I tried to be a good boy because they kept asking me about that. My report card in school was a property of the entire camp. They knew what my grades were whenever I got my report cards.
Now, you did leave Maui and you went to the University of Hawaii, where you ultimately graduated. How did that happen?
Well, my high school teachers did everything they could to try to convince me to go on to college. However, they understood and I understood. My father was never able to finance me to going to college at all. He didn't have the funds to go to school. So that when I graduated from Honolulu High School, I set my eyes on going back to the plantation and to start working on the plantation on the pineapple fields. But my teachers did their best to try to get me to go into college. And this is where some other friends stepped in, and by golly, they contributed to my being able to go to college at the University of Hawaii.
Well, you know, it's interesting because there certainly was no affirmative action programs when you were a young man heading off for college, but in a way, in a sense, there were sort of de facto programs in that the men of the camp pulled together their resources, both financial and otherwise, and got you into a place where you could leave and go to the university. I know you graduated and ultimately you became a speech teacher. Is that correct?
That's correct. In order for me to go to college, a friend of mine whose family lived in Honolulu invited me to come and live with his family. Fortunately, I was able to get a job at Dole Pineapple Cannery also. And what I earned from Dole Pineapple Cannery helped finance my going to school at the University of Hawaii. That was a big help. And much of that, I would say, would considerably say, was for the fact that Dole Pineapple Cannery at that time was able to give me a job and allowed me to continue my schooling at the University of Hawaii. Later on, after 4 years, my teachers at the University of Hawaii also stepped in and encouraged me to continue getting more your education at the University of Hawaii, and they got me into the department, the speech department, so that I could do a graduate assistant's job at the University of Hawaii. While I was there, one of the speech teachers was a very dear friend of mine. Her name was Margaret Awamura, who eventually became the wife of Senator Dan Inoue, who used to come and visit with her at the speech department offices.
Now, I'm going to jump way ahead,
No.
Judge Loretta. I know that eventually, through the assistance of a priest and other individuals, you were encouraged to and obtained the resources to go on to law school. You went to New York City and enrolled at Fordham Law School. Is that correct? And ultimately, you know, you met another individual there who happened to end up being your wife. Evelyn was a dear friend of mine until her passing very recently. She was a nursing student at Columbia University, and one of the persons that she lived in the area with was a friend, another young Filipino woman, who, like Danny Noy met Maggie, the other woman, Ms. Suyat, had a paramour, and his name was?
Thurgood Marshall.
And the Thurgood Marshall, who was at that time, I think, the general counsel for the NAACP, is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. Thurgood Marshall, I met him while I was going to Fordham Law School. And he used to visit Sissy Suyat at the apartment where I lived. And I met Thurgood Marshall at the time when he was still a young attorney, I guess, being the representative for the NAACP, a
Right.
very important person for NAACP at that time.
Little did he know that he was going to be a United States Supreme Court jurist and that you would be a
That's
United
true.
States judge.
I eventually got to meet him, got to know him a little well, and Suyat,
Right.
Sisi got to marry Thurgood Marshall,
Okay,
became his wife.
I'm being, we need to take a little bit of a break here.
Yes.
A commercial break, and then we'll be right back, and we're going to talk to Justice Acoba. when we
Thank
get
you.
back.
Aloha, I'm Kili'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute and host on Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii broadcast network. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Think of the sad alternative, let's not work together. Here in Hawaii, with all of our diversity and the richness of the people, it's important for us to come together around issues on the basis of what's right and what's good and what's going to serve the common good. And that's what we try to do at Ehana Kako. Every week, we interview movers and shakers, people in government, business, and other sectors of society to talk about how to create together a better government, economy, a better world here in Hawaii that can bless the rest of the world. I thank you for your attention to ThinkTech Hawaii, and we look forward to seeing you every Monday, 2 to 3 p.m. on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We're Ehana Kako, and we wish you well. Aloha.
Thank you. We're back, and we're starting to get on a roll here. We haven't quite left the plantation dust behind us on the long road to the bench. Once again, the guests this afternoon are the Honorable Alfred Laureta, United States District Judge, retired, and the Honorable Simeon Acoba, retired Associate Justice of the Hawaii State Supreme Court. And now we're going to segue right to Justice Acoba, who has also similarities and some differences in his background. Why don't you just take it away, Justice?
Thank you, Howard, and thank you for that wonderful and generous introduction. I'm no longer a judge, so I can't really help you out anymore. But it is really an honor to be seated here with Judge Loretta, who has been a trailblazer in so many ways, not only for the Filipino community, but for our state as a whole. My story is a little more straightforward. I wanted to talk a little bit about my parents, who were the ones who grew up on a plantation. And although, you know, their story sounds like it had a lot of hardship, I think it's a story that's common to many immigrants who came to Hawaii. But my mother and her sister lived with their parents in the mountains of, I think this is correct, Kekaha plantation on the island of Kauai. And so what he would do is he would control the waters that ran down to the sugar plantation. So it was just the four of them up there in the mountains. And at a young age, her mother passed away. And so my mother was essentially raised by her older sister, and her father went back to the Philippines. And my father had a similar story. There were about 9 children in his family. They came to, his father brought the family to Wailua sugar plantation. And there, his mother also passed away in childbirth. So with a young family, my father's father felt he had to return to the Philippines for help in raising the children. So he did return, but he left his oldest son, Simeon, my father, who was at that time 15 years old. And so my father was essentially raised by relatives who were on the sugar plantation. And so my mother and father, as did many immigrant families, worked hard. Family was important to them, and they sacrificed. And so my sisters and I received a good public education. I went to Farrington High School. We were raised in Kalihi. And one of the benefits of going to Farrington is that there was a Wallace Ryder Farrington Scholarship that was sponsored by the Honolulu Star Bulletin at that time. And so I was fortunate enough to go to the University of Hawaii on that scholarship. And then I eventually ended up at Northwestern Law School. and graduated from there, and returned to Hawaii when I was hired by the Chief Justice as his law clerk. And I feel fortunate because I didn't have to go through an interview. I submitted an application, and he accepted the application.
Terrific. You know, actually, there are two legends from Farrington High School class of 1962, was it?
Yes.
Because you're my contemporary, although
I have more hair, but
you have more hair, but then again,
I went to white. It's more white.
Yeah,
so.
I went to McKinley, so you know that I have a leg up on you. No, I'm just kidding. But the two legends, of course, from Farrington that I heard of when I went to the University of Hawaii briefly. I went off into the Army after that, but it's not about me. Is one of the legends was, of course, Simeon Acoba, who was a scholar. I heard about him from Kawananakoa days, that you were quite an achiever. And even today, when I get together with friends who are long retired, they tell me, yeah, you know, Simeon was just a really good student. Of course, the other legend, nothing much more needs to be said other than his name, which is Skipper Diaz, for different reasons, of course. So Judge Loretta, when you got back here, you looked for a job in big firms, and I understand you were having some difficulty obtaining work there?
Well, when I came back to Hawaii, I just got married to my new wife, you might say, and we came back to Hawaii, and I started looking for a job, and of course I had no job, and I hit the different law firms in Honolulu, and unfortunately they just weren't looking for somebody. Fortunately, I ran into another attorney, and he introduced me to a fellow by the name of Bert Kobayashi. And he says, why don't you go talk to Bert Kobayashi? He might be able to help you find something to do. Well, I did. I went and spoke to Bert Kobayashi and met his partner, who was Russell Kono. And I talked with them for a while, and they finally said, Alfred, you're looking for a job right now. Your wife is working for one of the doctor's offices, and I suppose she can help you financially while you go looking for a job.
Can I interrupt you and say, you
Yes.
had a young child just born, your first baby?
Yes.
Yeah, Mike.
Our first child was born in 1953. Yeah. And when we had our first child, and she was looking for a job, and I was looking for a job. She got a job, rather. And after speaking with Bert and Russell, they both looked at me and says, Alfred, how much do you need in order to keep you going while you're getting ready for the bar examination? And I said, well, I think maybe if I can do it on $200 a month. And I looked at them, and they both looked at me, and they whispered to each other. And finally, Bert says, Alfred, can you do it on $100 a month? I said, I'll take anything. And I took $100 a month that they offered me to do some work for them. But the kick was, Alfred, we'll pay you the $100 a month, and you do not show up in this office until the bar examination results come out. I waited until January the following year. The results came out, and by golly, my name was on that list, and it says, you passed, you're in the bar. I went over to Kono's office and Kobayashi's office and told them, look, okay, put a desk someplace in your offices, and let me go to work.
And you became a partner with the...
I became a partner with Bert Kobayashi and Russell Kono.
And both of them actually, of course, Bert Kobayashi, the elder, became himself a legend in his own way. He was an attorney general, then a Supreme Court justice as well, and wrote many opinions that are still relevant today.
Bert Kobayashi first became a attorney general for the state of Hawaii. Eventually, Jack Burns appointed him to the Hawaii State Supreme Court.
And Russell Kono became a judge also, and
right.
so did you. And then later on, a young man entered your firm who also held an office later, but not judicial office. was that?
While we were looking for, rather than looking for anybody to join our firm, someone came to us and asked if they had room for him to join our law firm. And we talked about it, and then eventually Burton, Russell, and I, we all agreed, okay, let's bring a guy in, or practically a new member of the bar. His name was George Ariyoshi. So that eventually our law firm became Kobayashi, Kono, Loretta, and Ariyoshi.
Okay, you know, I really wish I could go through this, you know, for another hour or two, but, you know, because of time constraints, I would like to ask you a few things. Your background and the people that you've come in contact with are really like a who's who in the history of Hawaii judicial and political history. Jack Burns, John Burns, Governor Burns, appointed you while Hawaii was still a territory to be the director of the Department of Labor. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And then,
well, actually, he appointed me
after
when he was already the governor.
Yeah.
We became a state in '59.
'59, and when we became a state, and I remember listening to the radio, Senator Inouye, Dan Inouye, became the first U.S. senator at that time, and you had a role in his when he went to Washington. What was that? That's
right. As soon as when he was first appointed to be the senator, was rather elected to become the senator for the state of Hawaii, I got a phone call from his office and asked me if I would go with him to Washington, D.C. and serve as his administrative assistant in Washington, D.C. So I went with him to Washington, D.C., and after he served at least as a senator, that's when, after that, Jack Burns called me and asked me to come back to Hawaii and served as his director for the Department of Labor. And after that, that's when he appointed me to the position of Circuit Court Judge in Honolulu, later Circuit Court Judge in Kauai, and eventually I got a phone call from Dan Inouye, and he says, you've spent 10 years now in Kauai, would you be interested in becoming a federal judge? At which time I said, yeah, I think I would be interested. And as things went by, eventually President Carter submitted my name for appointment to the first district court in the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands.
Well, it's interesting because as we're rounding out all these names, another name pops up, and that's Senator Sparky Matsunaga. Is that correct?
Yes.
And his role in your appointment was, I think he ushered your case through the Senate, the confirmation process?
That's right. In the confirmation, I had to appear before the committee, Judiciary Committee, in case there's any kind of testimony or anything that needs to be brought forth for the information of the committee. Well, Sparky Matsunaga came in place of Dan Inouye, and he was the one who introduced me to the committee, Judiciary Committee, for my appointment. And after the discussion with the committee, the name was submitted to the president, and my name was approved by the United States Senate.
It was a wonderful time. I remember being at your swearing in, and because I was there as your first law clerk. Barry Curran, who's a magistrate, was the law clerk for a federal judge as well, and also Tommy Kaulukukui. Now, going back to Justice Acoba, Northwestern, kind of an odd place to be, a great school, great law school. You didn't go, of course there was no University of Hawaii law school at that time, but you didn't go to the West Coast, you didn't go to the East Coast, you went to a stellar law school, obviously. But my guess is that you probably were one of the few individuals of any minority background, but certainly I don't know how many Filipinos were present at Northwestern School of Law. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, Howard, they accepted me, so I
Okay.
went. I think the draw for Northwestern was that it had a good reputation, and as you said, at the law school there were no people who were not white in my class except for myself, and but there were two people from Hawaii in the class before me, Ian Maddock and Peter Char. So they were there, but it was like very turbulent times because the civil rights movement had been was in process. The Vietnam War was also occurring. You know, Martin Luther King had been assassinated, and Robert Kennedy also. So, you know, law school was a time of turmoil, and the popular subjects were like poverty law, civil rights, you know, consumer rights, etc. So people were being drafted right out of class. So every morning we go to class and look around and wonder who was not going to be there. And so it was, in a sense, an exciting time. But I think what it did is, at least for me, prove that if you wanted to affect change, there was at least one rational, orderly way to do it, and that would be through the law.
Now, I'm going to interrupt you. I really want you to continue. We're going to pick it up where you left off,
Okay,
but I
no problem.
think it's time for us to take a commercial break.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, I'm Jay Fidel, that's Ray Starling. We co-host a show called Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, every Wednesday, 4 to 5 p.m. It's really interesting. You know, Ray has a way of unzipping these guys. He asks them these questions and all this stuff tumbles out, and we find out stuff we would never know about without Ray's questions. Thank you, Ray.
You're welcome, Jay. I'm very pleased to be your Ed McMahon every Wednesday at 4 o'clock here on the internet. So you can join us and see what's happening in the energy world, and there is a lot going on. So join us every Wednesday at 4 o'clock.
Yeah, come around, be energized right here on ThinkTech. Aloha.
Thank you. Back again. I'm Howard Luke, and I'm the host this afternoon's Living Legends Lawyers, sponsored by the Hawaii State Bar Association. To my immediate left is retired U.S. District Judge Alfred Laureta, and to his left is retired Justice of the Hawaii Supreme Court, Simeon Acoba. Justice Acoba, you know, those are pretty heady times, I guess. You were right in the place where people needed to be to make changes in our country in the future, I suppose. I don't want to preempt your own thoughts on this, but tell us about that. As you were going through law school, what thoughts, you know, came into your mind? What commitments did you make to yourself regarding the future? What future course did you intend to take as an attorney, and where would that take place?
Well, I think one thing that affected me was idea that you know, civil rights were important. At the university, I remember we did have a civil rights program where Martin Luther King attended, and James Farmer, the president of CORE, as well as someone from the Black Muslims and the White Citizens Council out of Mississippi. And so that was sort of an impetus to go to law school. And I remember that the Hawaii Bar Association had a Liberty Bell Award, and I think that was the first year they made that award. And I remember going to the bar convention and sitting at Dwight Rush's table, and they shut off all the lights at the Royal Hawaiian, and these people walked in with flaming baked Alaska, which was something I never knew about growing up in Kalihi. And I said, well, you know, this looks like a great profession. So, but anyway, when I was in Chicago, there were what were called the riots in Grant Park. And this was I guess, protests filed during the Democratic Convention. And so I wrote a letter back home about what had happened, and I was told later that the Chief Justice called in Peter Char and asked him if I was a radical and if he was, the CJ was making the right move in hiring me. And thank goodness that Peter Char is related to my wife, so he gave the right answers. And so I felt very fortunate, actually, to work with Chief Justice Richardson, who, you know, in many ways was really a trailblazer also. What he liked to say was pioneering in all the different areas of law.
Certainly. Your early years of practice, actually first couple of years, I think you were sort of something of a sole practitioner, the way a lot of my colleagues work today.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to name drop, but I wanted to touch on some of the same people who had some effect on Judge Loretta's career. You know, George Ariyoshi appointed me to the circuit court. And while I was on the Supreme Court, I remember I did a little bit of work for Justice Kobayashi, who had been Attorney General before ascending to the Supreme Court. And I remember he called me in one day and referred me to Matson Navigation because they were looking for a corporate secretary or a junior corporate secretary. And so I went down for the interview, but you know, I had thoughts of being a great trial lawyer, and of course it turned out to be totally wrong. So I didn't take that job. But I worked at the University of Hawaii after clerking, and had really the good fortune of working for Harlan Cleveland, who had been President Kennedy's ambassador to NATO.
Right.
So it was really great working with him. Then I went to the Attorney General's office, and I remember that they hired me to take over a job in environmental law. And at that point, Bert Kambara, who was Attorney General, had fired the deputy who was in charge of environmental law. And so it was a politically sensitive job. And he wanted me to take the job. And I said, no, I want to get into trial work. I'm finished with administrative stuff. So then as a result, he assigned me to DAGS, which was not one of the positions anyone, I think, in the office aspired to. So I think I spent the first few months in that job signing off on contracts as to form. So my entire office was piled high with contracts, and I just checked dates and signatures on. But eventually,
that's why you have all your hair.
yeah, right. Eventually, DAGS had a lot of money, and they got sued a lot, and I got into the courtroom.
Okay, how old were you when you were appointed to the district court?
I actually served the minimum amount of time. So I was appointed when I was 36. So, you know, a few people have said, I shouldn't have been appointed that young. So, but, you know, I have never regretted starting my career that way. I should mention that while I was in private practice, I was an adjunct professor at the university, and one of my students was John Waihe. And I'm glad he passed, because later on he would appoint me to the Intermediate Court of Appeals. And I shared office space with Ben Cayetano, and was fortunate to have done that. And Colbert Matsumoto was in that office, and also Dennis Potts.
Oh,
So-
sort of a constellation of luminaries in the bar. So if my math is correct, you've been a member of the judiciary for about 34 years. That's quite a length of time. You know. And you'd probably still be going if you could, but let me not make that decision for you. One thing I was interested in is, you know, I visited Kauai along with the gentleman who was here in the audience watching. He escorted Judge Loretta and his daughter from the airport. Judge Loretta, thank you for flying in from Kauai. Will Tungol, he was also a law clerk for the U.S. District Court in the Northern Mariana Islands. But, you know, when I was in Kauai the last time by myself and visited Judge Loretta, when his lovely wife was still alive. We had lunch together. It was very generous. And then he said, well, I have to go. I said, well, where are you going, Judge? He says, well, he has a pro bono mediation to do. So even though he was starting to get relatively advanced in years, he still was working for the Kauai Economic Opportunity Program and doing pro bono. And that really was inspirational in my mind, and a great inspiration for anybody who, regardless of their age or how soon or how long they've been in the Bar Association, to participate in worthwhile projects. Certainly what we do for a living gives us a lot of power to make changes in people's lives for the better. And same thing, Justice Acoba, you've been involved in pro bono as well over the years. I guess, you know, we're winding down in our time. I'm going to just stop asking specific questions and ask if both of you, if you have any thoughts that you would like to relate to members of the bar or those who have served with you or who are following you. May I ask you first, Justice Acoba?
Well, I think lawyers have a special obligation in our society. We are a society that's governed by the rule of law. And so I think it's an obligation of lawyers to be cognizant and to educate the public about important constitutional principles like the protection of, well, equal protection for everyone and due process. And I guess the most important thing I think I would say for young lawyers is that integrity really is the most important thing. And that your integrity should guide your actions and will really determine what your reputation and relationships with others are.
In the perspective from the bench, you could see and determine in your own mind which lawyers, not speaking necessarily about legal competence, but the integrity of their positions and their commitment to their work and their fealty to the rule of law.
Right, and I don't think, you know, being necessarily very skillful will win you the case, because sometimes the facts are just overwhelming. So it's so important, I think, to be competent, have integrity, and be respectful. And I think the courts appreciate that, and ultimately that serves the best interests of the bar and the state. And as judges, you always appreciate the person, even if you can't rule in favor of him or her, you know, honesty and you know, respectfulness and skill and competence.
Terrific. Judge Loretta, I know from personal experience, I don't know if you remember this, but I once asked you, you know, we had another court to go to away from our U.S. District Court, which at that time was in the Saipan Intercontinental Hotel. That's another story, and a great story it is. But we left really early for a court, and I said, you know, Judge, why are we leaving so early? You know, we're not, you know, you don't have to be in court until, you know, perhaps an hour from the time we were leaving. And Judge Loretta told me, you know, Howard, I demand the attorneys appear on time, and if they don't, I sanction them. And I have to abide by that as well. I will not be late to court. I will not make the lawyers wait for me. And he says, I said, but it's really early. I mean, and he says, well, what if we get a flat tire? So I thought that was a wonderful and charming moment. The gentleman to my left is very, very dear to me emotionally. I had been practicing only a year when he hired me with the infamous words, Howard, you really want this job? I can't give it away. So that's how I was hired. But in my own favor, about 2 weeks after I was hired, all these letters would come in from the you know, Ivy League schools, top young lawyers applying for the job. I just got there first, and it was too late to fire me, so or to unhire me. But anyway, Judge Loretta, any parting thoughts before we wrap this up?
Certainly, I'm very happy to be able to leave some thoughts with what we leave today. I'll tell you one thing right now. I certainly hired several law clerks for my court. And by golly, I had Will Tungle there, and I had Howard there. And I'll tell you one other thing. Whenever we had a decision to make, we would sit together, or the law clerks and I would sit together, and we would review the facts of the case and anything that would be helpful for us to make our decision. And every one of them, the clerks and and anyone else who may be sitting with us, gave their thoughts and came out with the idea as to what they themselves would have decided in the case.
Well, thank
We
you.
worked together on that, and we all came up with, I think, with what the right decisions are.
I'd like to think so. Well, thank you very much, Judge Loretta, Justice Acoba. Our time is up. I've certainly enjoyed this time with both of you, and I wish both of you well as to all the new members of the bar. I just looked in the directory. We're now to the 5-digit bar numbers, and so with a number of 295, Judge Loretta probably there are 30 times as many attorneys as when he started practicing law. But anyway, thank you so much, and that's it for this episode of Living Legends in the Law. Thank you.
Thank you very much.